والحين حننتقل للأستاذة عبير الراعي. خلينا نتعرف. The best way to protect the future is to invent it. خلينا نتعرف على هذه التجربة.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. All right. So hi, everyone. I'm Abir الراعي. I'm the Startup Ecosystem and Partnership Innovation Leader at IBM. Can you guys hear me all right? Perfect. I have been in this role for the past 2 years and quite acquainted with the startup ecosystem in Saudi Arabia and globally. Today, I'll be sharing with you some experiences and how startups today are inventing the future and the first step that people take to kick off their startups. One of my favorite quotes is, "The best way to predict the future is to invent it," by Alan Kay, an inventor himself, an inventor who has worked at Xerox, Atari, and Apple. So, an important question arises: can we really predict the future? How many of you think right now that at this point, can you predict what the future would be with technology? Does anyone know where we would be in 10 years? Yeah, not many people know, right? So we could not have predicted as people 20 years ago where we would be today with internet. How many of you are here from the 90s, late 90s? Don't be ashamed. I know most of you look like you were born in 2000. Perfect. Do you guys remember that beep sound from the dial-up modem? Right? The longest time it took to connect to internet in the late 90s. And if you're from the 2000s, don't worry. In Saudi Arabia, we still had dial-up internet in the early 2000s. And what would happen is it would take 15 to 20 minutes just to connect to the phone using your telephone. So it means no one at that time can have or receive any calls. Then we would slowly sign up, get onto Yahoo, get onto AOL or MSN Messenger. It would take another 10 to 15 minutes to even sign into our email accounts. And as long as I remember writing my emails really fast, by the time it went and clicked next, it would have taken me a whole process of over half an hour. The same process takes me almost a minute or less if I were to send a short email today. And that is where we are 20 years later. Can you imagine where we will be in 10 to 20 minutes, 20, not minutes later, 20 years later? So in the mid-1980s, McKinsey did a study for AT&T to forecast the prediction of subscribers in cellular phone for the year 2000, and this was in the mid-1980s. And what they forecasted is that we would have around 900,000 subscribers in the US alone. The actual number of subscribers using cell phones in 2000 was 109 million, just in US. And around the world, it was 1 billion by 2002. And can you imagine how cell phones looked at that time? This is how they looked. I know, right? It's amazing. I really miss those phones. Imagine hanging those in your little tiny purses. We have come a long, long way. Can you imagine how we search today? I'm fascinated about how the generation today is studying. So I came across my sister the other day, and she's in med school. She's sitting and studying something, and she has this device, Google. And she just goes like, "Hey, Google, what does this word?" I can't even pronounce the medical terms. It's just too hard. No matter how she pronounces it, she just goes like, "Hey, Google, what does this mean?" And Google right away answers her question. Do you know what that means for someone who grew up in the 90s? This is how I searched, and this is how I did my research projects. This is what Yahoo looked like, and I would spend hours and hours researching just one topic or one concept and coming up with a paper. Today, when you just want to, while you're studying, you just want to search a word, or you want to search something as simple as something in your life. Hey, how can I fix this small problem? Something you would ask your parent. Who do we go to? We just go to Google. Now we have Google Home, Alexa. We're summoning Alexa and Siri like it's nothing. And those are the things that are unpredictable. And this is why no matter how much today those economists, futurists, technologists, and those people who predict the future can predict it, we don't know where we will be from 10 to 20 years later. However, we do know that we can invent this future. And to invent this future, you need to be in a certain category. You need to be either an innovator or you need to be an entrepreneur. And how can you be an innovator? What is an innovator? Innovator is a person who creates new solutions to existing problems or anticipated problems of the future. Ages ago, centuries ago, not centuries, well, decades ago, Thomas Edison was an inventor when he came up with light bulb. Today, we look at someone as Steve Jobs, who was an inventor, and he came up with the Macintosh, the first Macintosh, and influenced the first iPhone. Now, it's really important for us these days, I see in the startup ecosystem, people don't differentiate between these two words. But it's really important to differentiate between an innovator and an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is someone who creates economically sustainable businesses based on these solutions. So both innovator, who creates new products, services, or process, and an entrepreneur who creates a business are essential to building a strong startup ecosystem. Now people will question that, can an entrepreneur be an innovator, and can an innovator be an entrepreneur? Yes, but there are very few with these qualities. There are a lot that they exist, but very few even succeed to come up with those startups. One of those examples is Steve Jobs, an inventor, a futurist, and an innovator, and an entrepreneur, as well as Elon Musk of SpaceX. Now let's look at the difference. When you compare them, you'll see that an innovator is someone who will be high in creativity and an innovation perspective. And when you look at an entrepreneur, they'll know the business know-hows and how to work from a management perspective. Though people can have those mixed skills, but generally as a person is able to, studies have shown, has been able to master certain skill sets with their personalities as well, and that plays a huge role. Now, an inventor, people think, and an entrepreneur are just related to startups, and corporate worlds wouldn't have that. To be honest, I come from IBM, and IBM is a company where last year they had over 9,000 patents. They had over 24 patents per day coming out of their 400,000 employees. So imagine in corporate world, we do have inventors as well. And corporate world, the entrepreneurs are called intrapreneurs that internally innovate. So an inventor is a product innovator, and an entrepreneur is a business innovator. So now I'll focus on a few ways of how you guys can become the inventors or the entrepreneurs of our future. And though people generally, through my experiences I've met, they struggle in so many phases of startup, I've come across so many people that say, hey, I want to start a business, or I know I want to be a businesswoman or a businessman, or I know I want to be an inventor. But the challenge they face is like, what is the idea? I had this idea, but I found it online and it's already been taken. Or I had this idea, but I feel like it's so difficult for me to start. We generally even fail at getting off with this idea. So I'll tell you a few ways that how people come up with inventions that are just so simple, and it will hit you when you start thinking of things this way in your life, if you start having this perspective. Inventing the solution to a problem. Most businesses, or most successful businesses, are formed when entrepreneurs face a challenge. Startups are created from real-life situations, and those are the ones that are most likely to succeed. Let's talk about some of the solutions that we know today that were invented. I'll tell you of a few stories, and they always start with two friends. So Airbnb. Have you heard of Airbnb? How many of you have heard of Airbnb? Okay, there are a few hands. So Airbnb started with two friends who had met in design school. They were living together, struggling to pay rent in an expensive city, San Francisco. There was a design conference happening in San Francisco, and through their network, they found that a lot of people were facing issues finding hotels. It happens. I'm going to World Economic Forum, and we didn't find a hotel, so we're living 2 hours away from that place. And it's a very normal thing in cities where large conferences are happening, people don't find up spaces. So what they came up with the idea to pay their rents is that they bought 3 airbeds, three mattresses. And they posted on their social media, Facebook at the time, that, hey, we're gonna have 3 mattresses and we're looking for people for $80, per night to come and stay. The next day, they had 3 people staying at their place. And the morning after, they were making breakfast for them. The next day, these 2 guys sat together and came up with the idea of Air Bed and Breakfast, which is now known as Airbnb. Today, every 2 seconds, someone books an Airbnb. And I was wondering if in Saudi Arabia, would people really use Airbnb? Are we gonna be comfortable having people rent a room in our house? Is that something? So I went onto Airbnb the other day and I searched. And I saw that while there were people posting their apartments or basements to be rented, there were very few. What is that our social cultural dynamics change when it comes to countries. And over here, rather than posting about houses, we're still using this app. We're posting about our farmhouses, tents, we're posting about furnished apartments. So it's still being used. It's just the implication that changes around. Another startup with 2 friends that were in Paris for a conference. There's always a conference. So they were in Paris for a conference and they had difficulty hailing a cab. And that was a moment when they came up with an idea for Uber. And those entrepreneurs were specifically successful as well because they were serial entrepreneurs and they had previously had startups. So that is one of the major effects that they had when coming up with this. They didn't wait to start. They just kicked off their idea. Another startup that has 2 friends. It's very interesting because I went to school with one of the co-founders for Snapchat. They came up while sitting in a room. I don't know how to put it, but let's say they messaged something to a friend by mistake. Do you know when that happens? When you message something in the wrong group on WhatsApp or message and it goes to your parents? Have you seen those memes, the funny things you send? And you get so embarrassed. Thank God WhatsApp has a delete option, but I've done that too often. Sometimes I've taken a screenshot and send it in the same group, and there's no explanation to that. So what they came up with that, this guy, he sent a message to a girl by mistake. And he regretted it. And in the moment, he sat in his dorm room and told his friend, I wish there was an app where I could just cancel it or that person could see it and forget it. Didn't have any way to show it to anyone else. There's no evidence of it. And they came up with this company. Today, all of these companies are valued at these. Can you imagine just by facing a normal situation in your life and people discussing a problem and creating an application out of it? It's not as easy as that. They face a lot of struggles. Uber faced lawsuits when they took over the taxi business. Snapchat as well struggled to have the patents and had to out one of their co-founders. And now we look at how Snapchat has influenced other companies. Facebook really tried to buy out Snapchat. How many of you know that Instagram and WhatsApp are owned by Facebook? All right, this is a good number. So there's some number on the girls' side. So Facebook was interested in buying Snapchat and they weren't able to buy, and the company went public recently. Whereas Facebook was able to buy WhatsApp in 2014 and Instagram in 2012. And these days, we struggle while coming up with inventions and entrepreneurs to get patents. Not everything is able to get a patent, but the ones they are in the technology world, the larger companies always win. They're able to tweak your idea in little places and use it. So if you have seen on Instagram, there's Insta stories, the idea is taken from Snapchat. And when you open WhatsApp and you see the status change, the idea is taken from Snapchat as well. Though it's not the same pattern that they came up with, this is how it is. And this is how in the real world, even large startups are struggling, yet they're surviving. Another way to invent is invent where your expertise lie. You know, in our community, we come across so many products and we never think about who would have created this. We don't go into details of who would have created our, the car that we drive, the airplane, the electricity, how does it get to us? We don't look into how the internet gets into our house. We don't look into these things and we take them for granted. But the people who are experts in their areas, they've spent years and years of studies and researches to become and get to that place. They're called the Outliers. There's a really interesting book you guys should read if you ever get a time or you're into reading. It's called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and he talks about how people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs came and made these companies and were entrepreneurs and inventors not because they got lucky, not just because they got lucky. It's because they sat in their garages and spent hours and hours studying and learning how to program and skill and develop these things. And that is another way where we find inventors generally, is that people who have spent large percent of time learning certain things and understanding the difficulties they face in their areas, and they know that they have to come up with a breakthrough, like a solution to AIDS, a solution to cancer, a solution to a certain thing, and they have their mindset on it. Those are the true inventors. I'll talk about some startups that are up and coming. You might not have heard about them, but just to give you an idea of how inventors of today are building the future. So we have the startup called PaveGen. Right, PaveGen. And what happened is that there's a lot of startups coming up with how to, gain electricity from certain movements, etc. So this company came up with the idea of a smart flooring startup. It generates electricity through footsteps. So what they do is they place these pavement tiles outside certain stores or sidewalks. And when you walk on it, it generates kinetic electricity, which is then used to light bulbs or light a sideway path if you're walking through it. This startup went way ahead. Can you imagine building a startup of the future? When we're struggling with electricity in certain countries where there's no electricity by just walking on it. They didn't just come up with that. They went a step further about how they're going to use that data. They're going to use that data to analyze consumer patterns, the ability to predict when is the peak timing when someone is waiting outside a store or entering a certain store, or in times of crisis when there are protests going on, when there's security needed, and there's people walking on these side pavements. It can predict where the highest number of people are standing at any point, where the police needs to be directed. These startups are literally looking into the future. And the best thing that classifies them as social entrepreneur. If I haven't explained social entrepreneurs, those are the entrepreneurs that develop solutions related to social, cultural, and environmental issues. And I know as people think that social people are just, social startups are for creating the good, they do not generate profit. It's a wrong concept that we have over here. They generate a lot of profit and they get investments. The ones that are doing for nonprofit, they are called nonprofit startups. So this startup, to keep up with the pace, and what excited me is they came up with a digital currency. And they came up with the idea recently that if you download their app and you're walking through this pavement, right now it's in certain cities only, you're walking through this pavement, for every step you take, you'll get a digital currency. Digital currency is something like Bitcoin, if you're aware of that term. And you get a Bitcoin for walking in that place, and you can get rewarded either as loyalty or donate it to a charitable cause. Imagine how the startup is doing their social work. Another startup we have is Zero Master. They create water from sun and air using existing natural resources. I had a feeling this video wouldn't work, so I'll just explain it to you. So what this startup does is that they use solar panels to collect sun's energy, and they use the air to take out the hydrogen, and they create water from just two existing resources. And the startup has been doing amazingly well. It's expensive. It's an expensive thing at this time. And there are people investing in it to use it in schools and governments, but there are also people who are donating to them so they can be used in areas where people struggle with getting water. And that is how inventors of today are building the future. And it's important that we give a chance as people to inventors coming in our area and as entrepreneurs to match up with them. So when I said that, yes, some people can be inventors and entrepreneurs, that is very few people. But generally, when you see successful startups, they're inventors and entrepreneurs coming together to work. And that is another struggle we face if we know, even from recent talks with Badr, they mentioned to me that only 10% of their startups have their own developers. The developers are inventors of the entrepreneurs coming with the ideas. Another way to fill this market, another way to invent is to fill the gap in the market. And those are the smartest people, and those are just even local businesses you see on your street. Do you see a new area opening up in Riyadh where new houses are being built? Do you know what directly happens in the road outside? Is that people will suddenly open a pharmacy, and they'll see there's no mini market, they'll open a mini market, there's no bookstore, they'll open a bookstore. Then we'll have a trend. And then there will be 3 pharmacies on that same street, right? We love following trends. As Saudi people, we love it. If there's a burger store, we'll open 10 more. And then 2 years later, only 5 will survive. So it's a really good thing to get into, is that when you see a gap in your market, I'll talk about 2 recent amazing startups that are doing that. One of them is this Gone app. It hasn't come over here, and it's just started in 2 cities in the US. And this app, what it does is over here, when we're trying to sell furniture, and I faced this as a student back in the US, when you're trying to leave as a student, you have this urge like, okay, I have to, you have the stress that I have to sell my furniture before I leave, or you're moving to another city. So what the Gone app does is that you take a picture of your furniture and you just upload it on the app. Within a few minutes, it does some searches of the similar product around how much a used product would cost, and it sends you the price. And that's it. The next thing you know, they have partnership with UPS. UPS comes and disassembles that product if it's a large piece of furniture and sends it. And they don't store it anywhere. What they do is they resell it to Amazon, eBay, and other furniture places. Or if there's a posting for that product, someone else buys it. Do you know the hassle and the inconvenience you go through selling a piece of used furniture? It just erases it in just a click of a picture. And as soon as it's sold, you get your payment in your mail. Now, this is where a gap has been filled. Another startup is Wheeliz. Wheeliz is the startup that came around the time when Uber and Lyft were getting sued. So what happens in the US is that you cannot discriminate against disabled people. And it's funny how it happens in the business world too. If you're serving something and it's something that can be used by disabled people and you're not serving them, you can be sued. So were getting sued at the time for not having cars for disabled people. Though now we open Uber and Kareem, and we can see the wheelchair, the WAV, which is for wheelchair accessible vehicles. I have never found one for Saudi yet though. But what happened is that around that time, the startup came up, Wheeliz, and what they would do is similar to other car sharing startups like Turo. If someone has these accessible cars, what they would do is they would rent it off to someone else who's visiting that city. And it created this shared network for renting off accessible cars. And they filled a gap that Uber and Lyft, such large companies, couldn't have filled those. So now is a really good time to be an inventor and innovator. If you look at this chart from IBM, you can see that in the 90s, we were at the peak of e-commerce. You can see that in the 2000s, we were at the peak of social media sites like Facebook and cloud. And end of 2000s, we had smartphones. And now we have these social businesses. And now you've seen for the last few years, the largest companies have just been Amazon and Google and Facebook, and they're just buying everyone else out. Those areas have reached their peak. While there will be some breakthroughs, most likely they won't be as large as these. It's really important to understand what's happening in our country and what are the changes and the factors behind it that are driving it. What are the regulations that are getting lighter or stricter? You can't predict, but you can see a pattern and you can understand where to grow your business. So let's take a small example in Saudi Arabia. Women are gonna drive, right? How many women are happy for it? Round of applause? Men? No? All right, so not a lot of women are happy for it. It's fine, I don't like driving either. But the change it's gonna create in our country, when I heard this, the people who were business-minded, they were like, yes, we'll open, you know what? I'll open a female business driving school. Others were like, insurance is gonna make so much money. These ladies won't know how to drive at all. Other people were coming up with ideas of apps and how they can learn and see videos and learn how to drive. And you see that there's so many other things happening in our economy, such as entertainment, and you see the rush of these startups that are posting the next event that is coming up. There's Lammat, there's Roznama, there's so many things that just come up by change in your society, and that is one of the easiest way to find a business opportunity and idea to get into. And sometimes you have to imagine yourself and imagine the future to invent it. So I was thinking of, when women are gonna drive, no one understands the social construct, the cultural construct of what's gonna happen. We didn't plan for it, but we are going to face so many issues. One of the issues I thought of over here, and I thought if I ever told anyone abroad about this, they would laugh at me, is a parking issue. Do you ever go around malls and see how spread out our parking lots are? Do you imagine a Saudi woman, probably with children, getting dropped up, parking her car at the end of the parking lot and walking with the children to the mall? Does it seem like a normal concept to you? I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's not a normal thing over here. We are used to convenience of getting dropped in front. And as much as you know how unsafe parking lots over here are, husbands make sure they drop their wives and their children, even if they're with them, at the front of the mall to make sure that they're safe and don't have to walk that part. We haven't even thought about all the female side of the universities where we have no parking lots. We only have enough parking lots for the drivers to stand for 2 minutes. Do you know how many startup ideas that just come to my mind about just thinking about it? You know, having parking lots, the paid parking lots nearby. People will be willing to pay, having valet parking startups coming up over there. So if you look at these small areas with fast-changing world in Saudi Arabia, you'll find many areas to grow into and places where there are larger chances of success. So I would say don't give those up and find those. And if you find an inventor, an entrepreneur within your families and friends, encourage them, influence them, because we're in a time where a lot of business will fail, but many more will succeed. I'd like to end my presentation. All right, missed the slide. I'll just jump over it. So I'd like to end my presentation with another of my favorite quotes. Invention is a process. You don't get there overnight. As much as easy it seems to come up with ideas, those who are building startups struggle daily. And it is a process of failure and then success and failure and then success and then reaching your final success one day. With that, thank you so much, everyone, and I'd like to thank Launch Your Business for their time and inviting me here.
شكراً لك يا أستاذ عبير. طبعاً الحين التكريم مع يتقدم المهندس معتز سمنان، استشاري في PBS بالتكريم للأستاذ عبير الراعي.